rest of us.
Yeah. What's it like to be interviewed by Charlie Rose? That was a question from the audience.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm sure it was better than this experience being interviewed by John
no,
Wood. But,
I was just going to say it's almost as good as John Wood. He's an accomplished interviewer, and he does a very good job, and it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. You're probably referring to the fact that my son and I were interviewed by Charlie Rose about a month or so ago, and it was a very pleasant event.
have you met Nelson Mandela?
I have met Nelson Mandela, yes.
I'm envious.
Speaking of heroes.
He's one of my heroes.
Yes, indeed.
What was that like?
Well, it was exhilarating. I mean, he's very bright, very engaging person. Remember a conversation, big time name dropping here, I'm sorry, but
I started it, it's okay.
I was in Africa with Jimmy Carter and his wife, my wife and I, the four of us, and we had a meeting with Mr. Mandela, a couple of them as a matter of fact, and it was clear that he was disappointed in what was going on in South Africa in terms of dealing with the AIDS problem. And he was very circumspect about that because the guy who was running the country is somebody that he was very much responsible for. But he was not comfortable with what was going on there. Very interesting.
I think to myself that must be interesting because if you're Bill Gates Sr., there's probably not a lot of people who turn down an opportunity to meet with you. Has anybody ever, like, dissed you?
Has anybody ever?
Sorry, it's street slang, you know, here on the tough streets of the marina in San Francisco. Disrespected you, refused to take a meeting, not return your phone call. Has that ever happened in the last 5 years?
Sure.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Who? Name names.
Yeah. I have some very conservative former friends.
Ah. Well, as long as they're former friends, I think you can name them, can't you?
Next question.
Okay, next question. Well, I think we have time for about two more. So I also just wanted to ask you, you know, in terms of the current leadership of the world, there's a lot going on, in both positive and negative. And was going to ask you if there's anything in the last couple of years of history that make you even more optimistic about the world your grandchildren will inherit.
Well, you know, our problem with the Muslim world is you know, it's really a big thing. We're talking about two halves or so of the world that seem to be going in different directions, and the fact that in that world there are people who really are very ready, willing, able, and enthusiastic about shooting people like us because of the divergence in our beliefs. So you asked me about saying something optimistic, and I guess I ran off in the other direction, but I think of that as being such a fundamental and gigantic problem because there are just so many of them and so many of us, and getting somehow across that. But
and yet I can inject a note of optimism and say that we see in the Swat Valley recently people have risen up against the Taliban and are beginning to speak their minds. We see in Iran people taking to the streets, and you have this unprecedented outpouring of people expressing their opinions and daring to defy the government. And so I do think there's a lot of interesting things going on right now, some of which are nihilistic and some of which are optimistic.
Well, there is one thing going on in the world which is critical, and that is kids are going to school. And they go to school and they learn about things from their teachers and from the books that they read, and they see the world differently with that input than they see just being at home with a prejudiced old man. And I think there's natural progression for the world, liberalization, sophistication, increased intelligence and reasonableness that arises from the system of public schooling, and it isn't going to go away. So we'll ultimately get past this dichotomy that exists in the world, and it's not the only dichotomy, but it just happens to be the major one.
I regret the fact that we have to end, especially because I've never seen an audience in Northern California go this long without checking their BlackBerries before. So obviously everybody's been quite captivated by this conversation. This radio program will air after Father's Day, but we're here the Sunday before Father's Day, and I thought it apt to end this session with a quote from your son when he said, "Dad, if someone asks if you're the real Bill Gates, I hope you say yes. I hope you tell them you're all the things the other strives to be." Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Our thanks to the audience, our thanks to Bill Gates Sr., co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the author of Showing Up for Life. This program has been part of the Traverse series on ethics. We thank our audience here, and we thank our audience on the radio. I'm John Wood, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, celebrating more than a century of enlightened discussion, is adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Gates.